Hello and welcome back to the podcast. We have a podcast first today because we have a president, a real life president on the podcast of the day. And not only that, but he's the youngest ever ARLA Propertymark president. So welcome to the podcast, Harry Trueman.
Hello, hi.
So talk me through this whole president thing because you were president-elect last year. How's it work? Is this like another job? Like what's the perks here? What's the perks of being the president?
Oh wow, it is like another job, but a really good one. Okay, so any member of Propertymark can put themselves forward to become vice president. So you get voted in as vice president, and all the members have the option to vote. So every year this happens. We're just about to start looking for the next VP now. And the voting goes out to all members. You can all vote. We have historically a really low voting turnout, which is really is such a shame because it's really easy to do and you can also be really nosy. So I'm always quite surprised that we have such a low voting turnout. But you vote and then the winner becomes vice president. So they are vice president for a year, and then you move to president-elect for a year, and then you become president for a year. So you sort of in this 3-year term, you then become immediate past president for a year as well, but you don't need to do too much then. But it's a sort of 3-year term that you give up of your life for free to represent members across the UK. So it's a really big thing and very exciting, but a huge commitment as well.
I mean, only half the country turned out to vote on us leaving the European Union. So, I mean, the property market voting voting I
True.
should be a bit lower than that, I would have thought.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I feel like slightly more important, but no, I'm joking.
so is it a 1 year thing and then you're out? Is it 4 more years? What's the sort of timescale you've got?
No, it's 1 year and then you're done.
Okay.
And there has been presidents that have done duplicate terms. There's no sort of rules, around like the US president going to do it twice. There's none. I don't think there's any rules around that. But I think it is such a big commitment. You do it alongside your full-time job. And there is a lot of travel. So I think for me, I'm really happy to have done my year and I've had a great year and I've had some amazing opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. But I feel like the year is I'm done. I was a regional exec as well before I was in the presidential team. So I've been part of Propertymark in that sort of capacity, not just a member since 2018. So by the time I finish, which will be a year after this year, I'll have given sort of nearly 10 years of my life for free to Propertymark. So I think it'll be time for a little rest then.
Yeah. Yeah, they're welcome. So obviously you've got a full-time job alongside it. So you are the group lettings director over at Andrews Property Group. So talk me through sort of let's go back a few years or so. How did this sort of property journey begin? Because obviously I wouldn't say that the president is necessarily the pinnacle of it because you've got plenty ahead of you in the future, but it's obviously a pretty high peak in the grand scheme of things. So take me back to the beginning. How do we all get started in this journey?
So, like many people in this industry, I am sorry to say that I just fell into it, which makes me really sad. That is what most people say. I came back from traveling. I went traveling for a year to Australia, and I came home and I realized I needed to start a career. I needed to get a proper job. And I'd always waitressed before that, and I was desperate not to waitress anymore. So I basically got my friend to get me a job in this tiny little independent service department and letting agent business in Cardiff Bay. So I started there and I loved it. And I found that I was good at it and I loved building those relationships with landlords and tenants and contractors. And I stuck around for the last 15 years. And that was basically the very start of my career. But I actually started on the service department side, which is much more of a sort of a hotel sort of feeling when you work in service departments or like the Airbnb sort of model. And I basically said to myself that I was going to put my hand up to everything that I could. I was going to say yes to everything. And one morning in our morning meeting, the MD, he said, we need somebody to help out on lettings. Is anyone interested in helping out 1 day a week? And I sort of put my hand up and was like, yeah, me. And that's where I got my first taste of being a letting agent. And I haven't looked back. I've only ever really worked in lettings for my entire career. I did help launch a sales division when I was MD of a previous company, but my heart will always belong to lettings. I think that's pretty clear now.
How important is that sort of yes mentality? Because we had Sarah Hood on the podcast a little while ago, and she was like, "It's my year of yes, so therefore I'll say yes to your podcast." Where historically I would have potentially said no to it. How important do you think in kind of career progression and sort of I suppose life progression, I suppose as well, is that sort of I'm just going for this and I'm going to say yes for it?
I think really important. I think when we get offered these opportunities and we get that little sort of scared feeling, that little sick feeling, I think that if you get that feeling, then that's a good sign. And if you go for it then and you overcome it and you do well with it, you really look back and you think to yourself, that was a really great period of learning there. And I'm so glad I did it. And I've come out the other side knowing so much more or having achieved something that I didn't think I could. So for me, whenever I get that little scared feeling, which I get regularly, that's a good signal to say you're worried about this, but this could be a real good thing, so you should go for it. So of all the different challenges I've had, the ones that I was probably the most scared of and I did anyway are the ones that I'm most proud of. So definitely important. And it's something that I've carried through throughout my entire career. That yes mentality is to take every opportunity you can and make the best of it.
Yeah, I think that's something I've tried to kind of keep that mentality. Historically, I used to kind of look at people and go, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do video content or have a podcast sort of thing. Now I kind of look at people and I'm like, you're no better than me. You've got a podcast. I can do that as well. You're no better than me and you're doing video content. I can do that as well, sort of thing. So it's kind of like, instead of looking up at people, you're like, okay, I can do that if I put my mind to it. I'm as good as you at doing this stuff. So therefore, I can do it if I really want to. So
Yeah.
I really enjoy that. That's really important.
Yeah.
So so you've done a wide range. You mentioned obviously launching sales divisions. You've grown business. You've done acquisitions. You've done loads of stuff over the time. What's the magic sauce in growing a lettings business? Is it the people? Is it the marketing? Is it the town you're in? What's sort of the magic dust that you can sprinkle on things to kind of make it work on the letting side?
So I think, I mean, in current times, growing a letting side is quite difficult. We know that there is a big change on the horizon for landlords. There has been a lot of pressure put on landlords over the last sort of 10 years. So it is hard. It is a battle. I feel like I do send my teams into battle sometimes to find landlords. I think when I look at our most successful valuers and the ones that consistently are able to bring on more business to grow the portfolios in which they operate out of, the most important thing I think that they do is they build rapport first. That is their biggest thing that they go into. And I was talking to my husband, who is an estate agent as well, and I was talking about a valuer that I have that is amazing. And I said, I think that she goes into every valuation, not with the mentality of winning the business or of terrifying the landlord about legislation or any of that. She goes into every single appointment just wanting to get to know that person and just excited to meet another person and how she can build that relationship. So I think for me, within lettings, because those relationships are so long, because you might have a landlord for 20, 30 years, that it's all about the rapport. It's all about making sure that you understand what they want from their investment and then you help deliver that. So for me, it's how you then portray that through your marketing to existing landlords in order to bring them on to what you're doing. So it's making sure that you're spending time to educate them, helping them understand changes, that you're running landlord events so that you can get in front of them, you can be in person with them, that your marketing talks about the knowledge that you have for the local market, for the legislation that's coming out, and you're helping all the time to move that relationship forward a little bit more each time you talk to them. So yeah, for me, it's how you build rapport in person and also through your marketing as well.
And I suppose it's a bit cheesy, but it's kind of that people first sort of thing, isn't it? And it's kind of, is it to understand is to forgive? Is that the expression where kind of if you get to know somebody, you actually understand where they're coming from and kind of where their life is at and whether they're stressed or not stressed or happy or sad or whatever it may be. Actually, if
Yeah.
you spend some time with them, you understand actually what is important to them, then you kind of like tailor your service more to that rather than just going, here's our one plan and it hopefully fits you and maybe it will and maybe it won't sort of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it's about understanding their pain and about what they want out of that investment. Because a huge thing about being an agent is that you're trusted. This is probably the biggest investment that person's going to have, so they need to trust you. But you need to understand where their pain points are so that you can deliver the solution to them. So it might be that they were a landlord previously and they had a really bad experience and their tenants didn't pay. So you can sort of mark that as right. I know that was a pain point for them and I've got a fix for that. So you're delivering the solution to whatever is their problem. So yeah, I think it's really important that you are getting to know them and you're really understanding what it is they want out of that investment. Do they want money right now? Or are they buying that investment as a long-term thing that they're going to pass on to their kids? It's all about understanding that, I think.
So you talked about legislation coming up. So I had a chat with Paul Jameson over at 20EA a while ago, and he mentioned the huge number or percentage of listings coming on the market that have been a rental over the last kind of 3, 4 years or so, and it was a good chunk sort of thing. So talk me through the legislative stuff that is coming down the pipeline. 'Cause I know there's one big one coming up.
Yeah, the big one we've got the Renters' Rights Bill, which we assume will be given royal assent in the next few months, and then we have an implementation date hopefully towards the end of the year. And that's going to be a massive change for landlords because we are going to be removing things like Section 21 notices. They're not going to be able to serve notice to a tenant when they want now. There's going to need to be a reason for serving a notice for eviction. So that's a huge change for landlords. All tenancies are going to become assured tenancies rather than the assured short-hold tenancy. There's going to be restrictions on advertising on rents and taking offers on rents. So there's a huge amount of change that's happening. There's private rental sector database, there's landlord ombudsman, there's loads included in this. And I think such a small percentage of landlords really understand what that is at the moment. I heard a stat that somebody did they surveyed 2,000 landlords and less than 10% had even heard of the Renters' Rights Bill.
Mm.
And just for me, because this consumes my life at the moment, seems really crazy, but it also is concerning that the government want to bring this in really quickly. We've got to get hundreds of thousands of people to understand what this means, and I just don't think we're going to get there. We're going to need to be looking at reissuing new contracts potentially. It's a big wholesale change for landlords that they need to know about, and they need to plan in terms of their investment strategy. How is that going to look long term? But I think that there's definitely opportunity. So I'm a landlord. My property is with an agent, and I have a rent and legal policy. So for me, I'm not that worried. The agent will look after it. The rent and legal policy will mean I still get my rent, and I'll be able to evict the tenant if I need to. It's not a big deal for me. But those landlords who are self-managing, who don't have that protection in place, who are going to have to understand all this legislation themselves, those are the ones that are in hot water, I think.
Mm. My key message here is anybody who goes on a rental valuation anytime soon and doesn't get full management, just go, literally, the president of Propertymark has their property fully managed for them, sort of thing, because they don't want to do it themselves to make sure it's all
I
kind of covered off.
I say this to my valuers all the time. I literally tell them, if there's anyone who knows how to manage a rental property, it is me, and I still choose to have it managed by an agent.
Yeah,
So.
100%. I have one property that we used to live in, which is rented out, and I have that fully managed. And I also have the is it rent guarantee insurance, whatever it may
Yeah,
be, that if they stop paying, it kind of covers the rent until they clear off, sort of things. Absolutely. So do you
yeah.
think that lots of landlords, let's say for example, I don't know, let's say this comes in December, let's pick a nice round date. Do you think lots of landlords will do a new tenancy agreement just before then to kind of get it on sort of the old terms, or will that automatically update the new terms by default?
So the new legislation basically says that every single tenancy, it will become that they all merge to this new system, and it will be like they have always been on that new system. So
Mm.
even if I think a landlord doesn't serve paperwork, it will probably default to it anyway. But I don't. We're waiting to see the detail on this. When Wales went to their change in legislation a couple of years ago, they had to reissue new contracts to everyone. Whether we need to do that, whether we can issue an addendum to show that there have been changes put in place, we aren't quite sure yet. But there will definitely need to be action taken by landlords. And obviously, being with an agent, what the agent can do for you is probably the safest bet. So,
Isn't this all just pushing landlords out of the property world? I mean, so I can talk from a personal point of view. My rental income on the property that I rent out, it counts as my basic income effectively as kind of an individual sort of thing. So my tax-free allowance every single year just disappears. It goes because it's rent coming in as into kind of the Chris Webb household sort of thing, even though I pay two-thirds of out in mortgage sort of thing, which obviously isn't a gain to me in any way, shape, or form, which obviously isn't ideal for landlords to start off with. But then more of this stuff kind of comes on board and it just adds more and more weight. Aren't they just pushing landlords out of the property game? Therefore, there's going to be less properties to rent, which means that, rents go up, which is obviously the opposite of what they want, really.
it certainly seems that way, doesn't it? That the government want to put more and more pressure on individual landlords to push them out. I think individual landlords pose a problem for the government because they don't know, they can't get the detail on them, they can't really get to them in terms of what they're earning and what's happening in them. And I think for the government, these larger scale landlords are much more attractive to them because they can control them better. They can see what's happening there. I think what the government want to do is provide a more even keel for landlords and tenants, and I can appreciate that. I feel like it is in the current power balance. It does seem like landlords have more power than tenants, even though this is their investment. I feel like they should have power over it, and the government's intention is to try and even that. But there is concerns among the industry that they're going too far, that they're restricting landlords too much. And will landlords say, this is enough? This is too much effort for me now. I'll get a good return in the bank, or if I put it in stocks and shares, I'm out. And then what happens to tenants then? Where are they going to live? And me and my friends and colleagues are constantly talking to MPs, to lords about this concern to try and get them to understand the unintended consequences of this legislation. But unfortunately, we have a Labour government and it is currently falling on deaf ears. So we have to wait and see. I think ultimately, owning rental property is always going to be a good investment. You get an income each month, and your asset goes up in capital value. So ultimately, it is a good investment. That's not going to stop. But I think there are going to be more and more single landlords who start to think, is this worth all the hassle? Whereas perhaps larger incorporated landlords might see this as, an opportunity to buy and get bigger.
And if you're going to go in your crystal ball here, look into the future, do you see this a case that sort of the current government are doing this to sort of win votes to say, oh, we're different from the Tories and we're kind of doing something different and we're doing something new sort of thing? So people who, for example, can't buy their first time property or struggle how expensive rents are, like, oh my God, they're doing something for us. But then do you see that in whatever it is, 3, 4 years time from now, the Tories will go back in again and they'll go, nah, we're going to get rid of all that stuff. We'll go Section 21 again. And we'll go back to the good old days of buy to let. Do you see that sort of cycle going on, or what do you kind of predict is going to be the future?
I don't know if it'll happen that quickly. So 2 points. The Tory government clearly have started to understand the errors of their ways. The previous Tory government. I've been at various meetings recently with Kevin Hollinrake, who has openly said that the changes that they wanted to make perhaps were going down the wrong path for the Conservatives. So I think, yeah, they're starting to understand that they were doing wrong. Labour's not going to change their mind because that's who Labour is. But I think if you look back over the last 100 years, 120 years, we have seen this cycle happen before when it comes to rental property. So at the start of the turn of the 20th century, most people lived in rented accommodation. They were big landowners, big landlords, and over the next sort of 40 to 50 years, where there was more building happening, the rise of home ownership started to happen. And it was in, I think, the 60s where we saw a peak of home ownership. People wanted to own their own homes, house prices were low, and people were buying and buying. And actually, the numbers of people renting property was very low. We had something called a Rent Act 77, which is when landlords were very, very restricted in what they could do. So similar to what we're going into now, they had to prove grounds in order to evict a tenant. They had to go to a rent officer in order to increase their rent, and they were very restricted. And as a result, the rental market shrunk. Then we had Maggie Thatcher come in the 80s, and she brought in the Assured Short-Term Tenancy Agreement in 1988, and that is where we see the booming rental industry that we have now. So we went through this cycle already. We're going backwards now, more towards the Rent Act 77 tenancies, and whether we will move through this and then they will understand this is not good. There is no rental stock. Landlords aren't buying. They're not keeping their properties, and we go back through the other side. We wait to see, but that's certainly what's happened in the last 100 or so years.
So how long do I need to hang on to for before we get sunnier climes? We're talking in a nice decade or so until the new Maggie Thatcher turns up.
Well, I think this is a good question in terms of your investment strategy now. So, as I said, I'm a landlord. You own property as well. I have my property for the long term, and I am still buying, and I plan to continue to buy over the next few years. And in 35 years, because let's face it, I'm going to probably need to be 70 by the time I get my pension. Um, I'm going to own that property, and then when I retire, I will sell it, and then I'll live off the proceeds. So for me, I've got another 35 years, so I'm not that concerned. Whereas if you've got people who are looking to get that income now, who perhaps are a bit older, those are the ones that are worrying. So for me, it's a long game. Perhaps by the time I do plan to sell, we will have gone back round the merry-go-round again. I speak to landlords all the time, and they say, I had my properties in 1970, and I remember rent-act tenancies, and they were awful, and they've still got them. So
Hmm.
we've got to wait for it all to go back round again, I think.
I mean, with my wrinkles and my hairline, I think I've got 20 years left in me maximum before it's all gone to pot sort of thing. So,
Then you'll be on a beach drinking pina coladas, yes.
yeah, 6 foot under the beach, probably. So, talk me through Property Mark then. So, I've been to Property Mark 1 last year,
Yeah.
which was very good. Went to it was a really good day overall. Why should agents care about Property Mark? How does it help them or differentiate them? How does it make their life better being a Property Mark member?
Well, being an agent, estate agent or letting agent, as you know, you don't have to have any formal qualifications. There's no barrier to entry. So anybody could set up a letting agent or an estate agent tomorrow, and off they go and crack on trying to sell people's biggest investments, the largest thing they own. They can do that. I think the reason property market exists is to provide support and learning to agents. So I think if you're a letting agent or if you want to be a letting agent, the first thing that you should do is you should turn to Property Mark to learn your trade, to learn your craft. Because as a letting agent, there is so much you need to know in order to operate safely, in order to give a good service, in order to protect your landlords and your tenants. So Property Mark provide that. They provide qualifications, they provide training. There's a great resource center where there's documentation, there's fact sheets, there's guides. And I think for me, I've always thought that if anything is to change with lettings, then I will be told about it. I don't have to go and fuss and find and research. They will tell me. There will be an email in my inbox saying this has happened. And I think that's invaluable for agents because things do change so often. You don't want to have to be worrying that you're keeping up to date. You want to be able to be informed. So that's one of the great things that Property Mart does. In recent years, they've actually spent a lot of time building more of a community as well. So we've always had things like regional meetings. That always used to be quite a big networking event. We have regional conferences now where we have sort of 150 people from a local region get together and have lots of learning and networking opportunities and meeting suppliers. We have things like the Facebook group, which is just for members, where people can go in there and ask questions. We have the helpline, which is manned by legally trained people. So if there is a real legal query or you're not quite sure how to do something, you can call the helpline. So again, it's all there for support. I don't know how you could be a letting agent and not have some sort of affiliation with something like Property Mart because how would you know that you're doing things right, really?
And is it aimed more towards sort of larger agents? Obviously, you're with Andrew's group, which is obviously enormous in the grand scheme of things. Is it aimed also towards sort of one person bands who sort of, run their lettings business out of a third bedroom sort of thing? Or is there a certain sort of size where it kind of the sweet spot for Property Mark?
Yeah, I think it's actually, I mean, yeah, we have within Property Mart, we have, corporate members, we have individual members. I think when you're a corporate agent, you will tend to have a compliance department. They are there to spot these risks, to spot the changes in legislation. And there's definitely still a benefit to be a Property Mart member if you work for a corporate agency. But I think actually, if you're in a small agent where you don't have a compliance team, that Property Mart is even more valuable to you then because they're going to make sure that you're kept up to date. They're going to make sure that they're flagging any potential risks that are on the horizon. They're going to be doing your training, your regular training. So I think we have a really good cross section. But I think for the smaller agent, there has to be some form of membership with something like Property Mark to enable you to keep keep that learning up to date and make sure you're operating within the law.
Absolutely. So let's talk lead generation and growing a lettings business. I'm a big fan of sort of lead generation strategies and what people are doing to sort of enhance their stock and improve their sort of lettings reach and sales reach as well. So what's kind of working for yourself now? You mentioned obviously times have changed earlier on with regard to sort of lead generation and gathering landlords. What's sort of the main drive for sort of getting landlords to work with your business as opposed to others at the moment?
So I think there's various different routes that we look at. I think one of the big things that is really important is your community-based work that you're doing because just like anyone, we buy from people we know, like, and trust, and landlords are just like that. They also know that there's going to be a long relationship out of this. This isn't just a transactional decision. This is something that's going to happen over several years. You might have to need your agent for decades. So I think the community-based work that agents do is really important. So this is things like networking. This is things like attending local events. This is things like running local events for landlords. So we do that within Andrews. We run landlord seminars. Our team do networking. They're very involved in the local high street and the communities they're part of. And if we can get leads from that work, then it's often that they are the ones where we're the only ones on the valuation because they already know us, they already like us, they know who we are. We're not going up against three other agents on those vals, and obviously we always know those are the best ones. We know we're not having to compete there and have to, potentially have discussions on fees and things. So for me, the community-based work, whether that is in person, whether that's using Facebook groups, that is the most important. We then have things like social media. We do a lot of work, our teams do, in terms of video and Instagram. And then we put out a lot of stuff within Andrews to do with educational stuff. So we have a regular blog. As I said, we do the seminars. We make sure we communicate with our existing landlords every single week. They have an email that has updates on legislation or updates on things that are going on. So those are the sort of the main things, the social media aspect and then the community work that we do as well, for me, are the big drivers. We also have, within Andrews, we have a big sales team. So we find that we work very closely with our sales counterparts, not just to work with the investors that are coming in, but to talk to people when their properties are up for sale, when they're empty and they're not selling, to try and see if they want to try their lettings market as well. So our sales team, that's a big source of leads for us.
Yeah, I always used to kind of work off the sort of 10-to-1 ratio when it comes to lettings to sales. So lots of people come to me and say, how do I grow my lettings business? And I'm like, actually, well, if you grow your sales business, every 10 or so properties you bring on the market and sell, you should be getting one or two rentals off the back of it because you sell it to a landlord or it can't sell, therefore it goes out to rental. And then vice versa, if you're looking to grow your sales business, by growing your lettings business by default, some of those, for example, might get sold to a buy-to-let investor, and obviously your sales will grow by default off that. So I guess they kind of go hand in hand on that side.
They do, yeah. And I mean, I've worked for businesses that didn't have sales sides, and I definitely noticed it was slightly tougher then. You're not known for that sales presence, so you have to fight a little bit harder to be known as letting agents. Obviously, we know the sales pool of people, potential sellers, is vast in comparison to the potential numbers of landlords. So, yeah, I think it is a bit of a different fight when you're a letting agency and you're just lettings to when you've got a really strong sales side as well.
And how do you think a smaller sort of self-employed lettings agency, let's say, can compete against a larger, more established agency? I appreciate you work for Andrews Group, so you guys are probably the larger, more established agency there. But what are sort of things that, if you were running your own sort of smaller business, what's kind of the competition you put in place to actually make yourself stand out from the crowd?
I think it's about that personal service, isn't it? I
Mm.
think when you a corporate agent, it's much more difficult to deliver that very one-on-one personal service that if you are a one-man band or a small team, a small local team that you can do. Um, Obviously when you're in a corporate agent, there's lots of team members, they do different tasks, whereas with a one-man band, it's one person doing everything. So you can really get that person's buy-in to the local agent. I know my local area, inside out. I know everyone that's in it, and if you ring, I will answer the phone. So I think that's a real differentiator for smaller agents, that landlords who are really looking for, because you've got some landlords, they don't care. Some landlords never even go to their properties. They buy it as an investment. It's a very transactional sort of decision to them. They buy it, they don't even ever go there. They send it to an agent, they say, get me an income, and it's literally just looked at like an investment. And then you've got some landlords who have a much bigger emotional attachment to that property. So whether their mum used to live in it or they grew up in it, and they really want to know everything that they can about the agent, and that they know that whatever time of day they will call and that exact person will answer the phone. So I think if you can, like I said, with the community aspect, if you can make it really clear that you are the expert in your local community and you know that community and all the properties and all the other local businesses as well as you can, then you will have the edge over a larger corporate agent who probably can't do that.
And how do you, as a larger company, so Andrews is a big company and big sort of corporate entity, how do you balance people having their own sort of personal brands? You mentioned obviously, people posting online and being part of the community and all that sort of stuff as well. How do you balance between people growing their personal brand within the Andrews group and staying at Andrews? And how do you balance that between people kind of growing their personal brand and then going like, well, I'm off to do my own lettings business now. Thank you very much. I'm now the most famous person in Slough. I'm off sort of thing. How do you balance that line?
I don't think you can really. I wouldn't want to, because I think it's really important to grow that brand to make sure that people understand who they're buying from. So I think I really encourage my teams to do that if they want to. Some people don't. Some people are happy to not be on social media. I think it obviously is a risk that you take that somebody builds that big brand and then leaves. But I think it's important. So I'm happy to. We're not. We keep talking about Andrews like we're this big corporate machine. We're actually not. We're a very small corporate, and we are owned by a charity, so we are actually a charity as well. And I think I've worked for enormous corporates, so the behemoth of corporates I've worked for, and I now work for Andrews, and I've worked for many independents too. And the feeling you get within Andrews is, yes, we are a corporate, but we're not going to clip your wings like that. We're not going to control people like that. If people, we have lots of people within the business who do really well on social media, who put a lot of time and effort into it. Alex Tan is an example. She's got a great personal brand. I think we would never want to stop people doing that. And yeah, I think it's important. So yeah, it's a risk you've got to take, I think, within agency.
I love that. So talk me through, final question. Talk me through how the charitable side of Andrews work. Because as you mentioned, it is a charity, is a call, which I think is awesome. I'm all over that. So talk me through how that works. Is it like a certain percentage of profits goes to charity or there's some sort of what's the score?
So people always love this, and I feel like the amount of people who are still so surprised about the fact that Andrews is a charity is crazy. We need to clearly do more about this in our marketing. But yeah, so we are owned by a charity. So a guy called Cecil Jackson Cole founded Andrews Property Group back in the 30s, and he very much believed that business and charity go hand in hand, that businesses should be able to support charities. So he founded Andrews Property Group. He was also one of the founding members of Oxfam, of Help the Aged. He was really into his charity work, as you can tell. And when he died, he bequeathed Andrews Property Group to Andrews Charitable Trust. So the trust own us, and it's sort of written into our rules that our profits are split three ways. So the trust get a third goes back into the business to be invested, and a third goes to the people. So it's very clear on what we do with those profits, and we very much believe that we exist for good. We want to give back to the work that the charitable trust does. They have a lot of different initiatives. One of those is the Established Initiative, so they support people coming out of care into their first homes, and they provide them with access to things like deposits, but also to support so that they can sort of set their lives up and help them with getting a job and setting up their bank account. So there are a few sort of housing-based initiatives that the Andrews Charitable Trust operate that we then work alongside with Andrews Property Group. So yeah, it's a very different feeling working for an agent that is also a charity. It does feed through into a lot of the things that we do, and we do make decisions differently because we're a charity, which I didn't really understand until I joined. And then when I got here, and I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna do that because we're a charity. Like I get it. So yeah, it's a great place to work, and I'm really proud of the work we do. And long may it continue.
I mean, you could definitely guilt trip some people on valuations, couldn't you? Be like, you don't have to instruct me, but those old people, they're going to go pretty hungry.
Oh. But no, I think it's a good thing, isn't it? I think, and I said this at the start, but I think we should do more about it. We should talk about it more. Just yesterday, we got a letter from Sue Ryder. So my husband must have taken a load of like stuff to the Sue Ryder shop near us. We got a letter saying that the stuff that we'd taken raised 170 quid. And my husband was like, "Oh, it's amazing! That's so good. They told us, and that's really good." And I was thinking to myself, like, we need to do something like that in Andrews. Like, tell the landlords and the vendors what by instructing us the good that does for other people, because it's really important, I think.
No, I definitely agree. Harry, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for your huge transparency. It's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.